The 2020-2021 free application for federal student aid. That is the long name for FAFSA. And there's a couple of key words in this name of FAFSA. The first one is free. So free is one of the most important ones, and that is because you do not want anyone to charge you to do the FAFSA. There's no reason why anyone should be requiring money for you to do anything with FAFSA. We will help you at Maine East for free, and the organization, which is called ISAC, which we'll talk about as well, they will also help you for free. There's no reason to have any money involved with FAFSA. The other one is application, and that's really all the FAFSA is. It is simply an application where you put in information, you send it to the federal government. That's another one of the key words here. And they tell you whether or not you get any aid, which is basically free money. There's the opportunity to get grants, which are free money that you don't have to pay back. There's also the opportunity to get student loans. When you hear about student loans, the FAFSA is where they come from. We're going to have a ton of resources to help. Starting in October, and this is kind of getting into one of the questions here that I see in the chat. How long do we have to fill out the FAFSA and how long to submit it? It opens on October 1st. If you were to go to the FAFSA's website, which is fafsa.gov, you would not be able to fill out the FAFSA right now. You would be able to fill out a FAFSA, but it would be the incorrect one. The FAFSA for, and I'm going to go to it again, the year 2020-2021 is not actually the FAFSA you want to do. You want to go ahead and do 2021 and 2022. So always think about the FAFSA in terms of when you're actually going to be in college using that money or using those loans. A student filling out the FAFSA right now is not going to use any grants or loans until next school year, which is 2021-2022. So that's why you want to fill out the 2021-2022 FAFSA. And I'm going to say this again later because it is important. We don't want you to do the wrong one. So to answer the question that I initially started off with, how long do you have to fill it out? Well, it opens on October 1st. That's the first day you can fill out the FAFSA. Technically, you can fill it out anytime before you start college. Realistically, because some of this money does run out, and we're going to touch on that a little bit, some of the money runs out. So you want to get it done ideally before Thanksgiving. That makes sure you are going to be fully eligible for any money that you are eligible for, and it doesn't, disappear on you. The worst thing that can happen is you fill out the FAFSA, you find out you qualified for some money, but the government tells you that money's already gone. So you actually just got to fill it out earlier next time. You definitely don't want to run into that situation. So some of the resources that we have to help you out, we have the most important one, which are FAFSA completion events. A FAFSA completion event, very simply, is a time where usually students would come into the building. Now we're going to be doing them virtually, just like this. And you're going to be able to actually do your FAFSA right then and there. With me, possibly the version of me from another school like Maine West or Maine South might be helping out as well. And then our ISAC reps, who are individuals from a organization that is specifically designed just to help you out with your FAFSA. That is all they do. They are 100% FAFSA experts. You got questions, they've got the answers. You need help, they are there to help out. They are available, and they're going to be at all of these FAFSA completion events. You'll notice quite a few of them are on Thursday. That just kind of happened to work with schedules. But we pretty much have one a week for the first few weeks of October. October 8th, October 15th, October 22nd. We have a couple that are going to be late from 5 to 7. So that might catch some people after standard work hours. And we have some a little bit earlier too. So Thursday, October 22nd will be from 2 to 6. And we even have one on a Saturday A lot of times people are working during the work week. They might have the Saturday available, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. This what should I bring items for FAFSA? We're going to touch on that a little bit later as well. Let's say none of these work out for you and you really want help. You are totally welcome to do the FAFSA on your own. But there's a couple of different places where you can get some help. You can get help from me. I'm Mr. Weber. I know I said that earlier, but just in case someone came in late, at calendly.com/MaineEastCCRC. This presentation is going to be made available, so don't think you need to rush to write down that link. It'll be available for you later. You can go back and see the link as well. That's mine. You can schedule an appointment with me at any time. It doesn't have to be about FAFSA. It can just be about college applications. It can be about career advice. Whatever it is that you need help with, I'm available. Specifically for FAFSA, I definitely recommend Miss Massini here is an excellent resource to use. Hers is www.calendly.com/Monica-Massini. She is a FAFSA expert. This is her second year helping us here at Maine East, and they get all the training. Literally, they do a lot of training in the summer to make sure they know everything there is to know about FAFSA. So she's available to help us out, and that's a great resource. So let's talk about some of this money that's available. And I do want to jump on one question really quickly that I see has popped into the chat. And that is, if you are a junior this year, could be freshman, sophomore, junior, anyone that's not a senior, do you have to fill out the 2021-2022 FAFSA, or do you have to wait until you are a senior? And that is it. You will want to wait until you are a senior in order to fill out your FAFSA. There's one exception. If you're a junior right now and you know for a fact that you are going to graduate in December of your senior year, so you're going to graduate early senior year, then you could fill out the 2021-22 FAFSA. We'll get onto that one a little bit later as well. So I'm going to touch back on that question. So when it comes to FAFSA, here are the big dollar amounts. These are the three big awards that we like to talk about. You'll notice that these dollar amounts are from 2018, 2019. So these dollar amounts actually have most likely gone up a little bit, but this is going to give us a general estimate. The dollar amounts aren't completely announced yet. The first one is the MAP grant. You hear this one get mentioned kind of often in Illinois. So the MAP grant, which is the Monetary Award Program, if you want to know what the name of it is, this is a award of just a little under $5,000 a year. This is a award that you can get if you are an Illinois resident and you're going to go to a college or university in Illinois. Think about that. That could be a school like Oakton. That could be a school like DePaul, Loyola, Lake Forest. Could be UIC, NIU, U of I, any school in Illinois. You can't take it and use it at Marquette because they're in Wisconsin, at Notre Dame, at University of Iowa. Those schools, you can't use it because they're not in Illinois. This money is only for Illinois students who stay in Illinois and who qualify for it financially. I said this is one you hear about because this is the one that runs out. When I said that you want to do your FAFSA by Thanksgiving, it's because we're afraid that this dollar amount here could run out at any time. It's been lasting longer and longer, but it's better to just get this done early to make sure that you have access to the money you qualify for. The next one is the federal Pell Grant. Federal is the keyword in this one. You can use it anywhere. So anyone filling out the FAFSA who gets this money, you can do, you can go to U of I, you can go to University of California. You can go anywhere and use this money. This one's over $6,000, so it's a nice chunk of change that's going to help you pay for college if you qualify for it. The last one that's available here is the FSEOG, and that stands for the Federal Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant. I would say the keyword in this one, there's two. One, federal. You can use it anywhere. It doesn't have to just be in Illinois. The other one is supplemental. And the reason that's a keyword is because this is the hardest one to qualify for. So this one, you're only going to qualify for this if you also qualified for the other two, most likely. So this one's hard to get, but we do have a few students who do qualify for these $4,000 each year. A thing I will note, it says up to for all three of these amounts. That means you could get the full $6,095. You could also get less than that. It all depends on how much money the FAFSA decides the family needs. The total dollar amount here is almost $15,000 if you were to qualify for all of this. So there is a lot of money out there to help you pay for school with the FAFSA. And this is one of the big reasons why we strongly encourage families to go ahead and fill out the FAFSA. So you don't really know if you qualify or not unless you actually fill it out. So at least some families are like, I don't know if we're going to get anything. I think it's always worth, at the very least, filling it out for freshman year. So that first year when a student, currently a senior, about to go in their freshman year of college, this is the best time to fill out the FAFSA to at the very least see if you get something. The worst thing that happens is you don't qualify for anything other than loans. And that's okay. You didn't spend that much time working on the FAFSA. Most people get done with FAFSA about 25, 30 minutes. That's not too bad just to see if you had the potential to qualify for up to $15,000. So I wouldn't be too worried about that. I do see a question here that I will get to. Is it good to fill out the FAFSA on the same day? And I would say sure, the same day it opens. So is it good to fill it out on October 1st? Yeah, probably. The website has a tendency to crash, unfortunately, on October 1st. So if you really, really want to get it as early as possible, maybe October 2nd, October 3rd might be a good way to do it. Or that first weekend if you really want to get it done early. As long as you get it done before Thanksgiving, you'll be okay. You won't really have to worry about the money. So what are the requirements for earning these grants? That's a great question as well that's just popped up. It's all based on financial income. So what the FAFSA does is, like I mentioned, it's just an application. It looks at family income. And it looks at other things like how many dependents parents have, if a student by any chance is an independent instead of a dependent. So independent, nobody's going to claim them on taxes. Maybe they are emancipated, for example. So it looks at things like that. It also will consider how many children are in college right now. So if you filled out FAFSA with your first child and didn't qualify for anything, but now you have your second child going to college and they're both at college at the same time, it is definitely worth filling out FAFSA for both children because they might now qualify for money that you didn't qualify for before because now you have two children in college. Could be three children in college, however many you currently have. It does not look at things like how much your house is worth or your cars that you have. So it's really just kind of focused on information that's in the W-2 and in the 1040. That's the big thing it looks at. It will ask about like savings accounts as well. And I'm going to retouch on this as well. But I will definitely go over some of that in addition. That's why I think it's definitely worth giving it the chance to fill out. All the FAFSA does, looks at that income, and it spits out a number. You're going to hear this number get referred to by probably me, maybe a counselor, but the colleges themselves will use this acronym, and that's EFC. So EFC is the estimated family contribution. That is all the FAFSA really does. It calculates a number. That EFC number is what the colleges then use, the individual colleges, to determine if you get grants from the colleges in addition to grants from the government. So this $15,000-ish here, you could actually even get more than that if the colleges themselves decide to give you some money. And that certainly can happen as well. I'm going to take a second to answer a question here from the chat. Feel free to put any questions in the chat that you have. What if your financial situation changed dramatically this year and will remain like that even after COVID, but it does not show on the previous tax returns? And that unfortunately happens all the time. Even before COVID, this happens. So your best bet in that case is that you are going to want to fill out FAFSA like normal, because FAFSA is asking for very specific information. So just fill it out like normal using the tax information. even if it doesn't really apply to your financial situation now, still do that, but then talk to the individual colleges. So if you're applying to UIC, talk to UIC's financial aid office independently after you filled out FAFSA. Same thing if you're thinking about, Northern Illinois, if you're thinking about Loyola, North Park, wherever, talk to the individual financial aid office and explain the situation. They have it come up every year, so they have a formal process that they go through for this. I will get to more questions in the chat later on, but I'm going to keep us moving forward at the moment, but I will come back to the questions that are in the chat. So we've talked about FAFSA, and I strongly recommend that you fill it out. But of course, the question's always going to come up of who actually can fill out the FAFSA. The easiest part is any U.S. citizen is eligible to fill out the FAFSA. But there are eligible non-citizens that can fill out the FAFSA as well. This is the list of those people. Very common are going to be permanent residents or people who have green cards. Those are the most common eligible non-citizens, especially that we have at Maine East. Green card and resident card as a permanent resident. Others would be like someone who has refugee status, who's been granted asylum. There's a few of these options. Definitely feel free to take time to look at some of this. But as always, I say, if you have any questions, you just want to send me an email or ask your counselor. That's really your best bet. Let's just individually figure it out. Because sometimes you can look at this and you're like, well, I think I'm this, but I'm not 100% sure. Let's just figure it out. So just talk to me, talk to the counselor, and we'll get it worked out. One that is not on here are people who have status of DACA or people who are of undocumented status. So we're going to talk about that right now. And there was a new law that passed last year or 2 years ago, I believe, called the RISE Act. And the RISE Act first went into effect January 1st of 2020. And this meant that people who have DACA, people who are undocumented, are able to fill out the FAFSA. So basically the people who are not eligible non-citizens are able to fill out not actually the FAFSA, but an alternative version of FAFSA. So you will not fill out the FAFSA if you qualify for the RISE Act. And I do want to make that point very, very clear. If you do not qualify to fill out FAFSA, do not fill it out. What you'll want to do then is see if you qualify for the Illinois RISE Act. And this is one of those situations where I say you can try and figure it out on your own, but just reach out to me or your counselor. So just send us an email, just set up a meeting, whatever it is. Let's just figure it out individually because we want to make sure that you do qualify if you qualify for this. Basically, like I said, people who aren't eligible to fill out FAFSA. This also encompasses transgender students who answer no to selective service because that is a requirement on FAFSA. So there are a multitude of people who are covered under this as well. This is not the FAFSA. This is a different application that can only be used by a resident of Illinois for Illinois colleges or universities. So you can't use this. It's very much like the MAP grant. You can't use this somewhere else. You have to use it in Illinois. So a student will only use either this RISE Act alternative application or the FAFSA. There will never, ever be a situation where a student fills out both. So if you ever find yourself filling out RISE Act and FAFSA, stop and ask your counselor or ask me, because there's never going to be a situation where you fill out both. You will only ever do one. If you're unsure, just talk to me, talk to your counselor, and we'll help you figure it out. So while I'm talking about status, it's important to note the status of parents does not matter for FAFSA. The only thing FAFSA cares about is whether the student is a citizen or an eligible non-citizen. If parents don't have a social security number, that does not matter for FAFSA. What you do when it asks for social, you just put all zeros. So put 9 zeros in there, and that's all you got to worry about. FAFSA does not care about the parents. for status. It cares, unfortunately, about your income, but it doesn't care about status. It just cares about the status of the student. This is what the website looks like. They could change it potentially, but they haven't changed it yet. So this is what it should look like. The first time you're going to fill out FAFSA, you're going to go ahead and start here. Very simple. New to FAFSA, go ahead and fill it out. This is the login. If the parents are filling it out, go ahead and use I am the parent. If it's the student, go ahead and use I am the student. I'm going to take a note here because this has a couple parts to it. One is, how do you actually log in? And that's with something called an FSA ID. An FSA ID, very simply, is a login for FAFSA. It is a username and a password, and that is it. I'm going to go back to a question that I saw a little bit ago about this. Let me just double check. Okay, so this question here was asking, in one of the posts that I had made in Google Classroom, I posted something called what you need to submit FAFSA. And one of the options was both student and parents have to create an FSA ID. Do the parents need it? So it's a yes and no answer to this question. Like I said before, an FSA ID is very simply a login for the FAFSA. It is a username and a password. Specifically, it will be an email address and it will be a password that you create. You will need an email address for the FSA ID. If any reason you don't have an email address, you will need to make one. The student 100% is going to need to make this FSA ID. The parents, it is actually optional if they want to do it. The advantage to using an FSA ID is two things. One, the parents can electronically sign the FAFSA because you have to sign it. So they can electronically sign the FAFSA and then it instantly gets submitted. If you don't do that, there's a paper you can print out, you can physically sign it, and you can turn the paper in. It's called a signature page. You have to mail it in. And I feel like I can say this as the son of a postal worker. The post office is not always the fastest thing in the world. So it will take time to get to, it goes to the IRS, to go to the IRS for them to deal with the FAFSA part. So I do strongly recommend both student and parent create logins for FSA ID. The things you need to do that: email. You need your own email. So parents will need an email, student will need an email. You'll also need to create a password, but you are required to have a social security number in order to do the FSA ID. So if you do not have a social security number, you will have to do this physical signature page and mail it in through the post office. You will not be able to create an FSA ID if you do not have a social security number. And it's okay if you don't. It's definitely okay. Don't worry about it. The question, does it matter who fills out the FAFSA? The actual answer is no, it doesn't matter who fills it out. Students can fill it out, parents can fill it out. My personal opinion is I would love if the student at the very least is there with you when you fill it out. So I like the students to be there because I do think it is the student's responsibility for some of this stuff, but there's plenty of reasons why parents might not want the student to do it. So that's okay. I do like if the student and the parent can at the very least do it together, especially because the student's going to have to do this every single year of college. You're always going to have to do a new FAFSA every single year because it's only good for 1 year because financial situations change every year. So because it's only good every year, October is going to come around, and if a student is physically living at the college, they're going to have to actually do the FAFSA most likely themselves then because they're going to be there and it's going to be October. So it's good for them to learn how to do it now. I'm going to answer a couple more questions about the login part. Can you log in as a returning applicant for your second child or use a new login? Yeah, you could do returning for a second child. They would be using their own FSA ID. So the second child is going to need their own from the first child. So in that case, you're actually going to have 3 FSA IDs: the parent FSA ID, student 1, and student 2. So that's going to require 3 emails in that part. But yeah, you could use returning applicant. That'd be fine. Do parents and students need to fill out 2 different applications? Thank you for asking that question. That is a fantastic question. No, it's just a student application. So the student is the only one who has an application. And that's a very important distinction. And I'm so glad you brought this up because when you're logging in, even though the parents and the students both made FSA IDs, only use the student FSA ID to log into FAFSA. Never use the parent FSA ID to log into FAFSA. Because if you do an application under the parent's name, that's great if the parent wants to go to college. But it's not the student's application. So the application is tied to the social security number. That's a very important thing because, like I said, it's tied to the social. So it has to be the student's social because that's what the colleges use to match up the FAFSA with the student. Let's see, a few more questions here. When I say both parent and student have a login, how can you combine the application? Yeah, that's a good question too. So it can be a little confusing. So you're not combining an application. You're only doing the one application. So it's only a student application. All that the parent FSA ID is going to do is physically be used to sign it. So because the FSA ID is tied to a social security number, you signing electronically with your FSA ID is you signing it essentially with your social security number in a way, but not really. No one's going to see your social security number. They're just going to see what your FSA ID email was basically. But that's the security of it because hopefully only you are going to know your social security number. So only you could have created that. So only you can use the login that you have. We're going to talk about parents in a second, so we'll get to that too. Let me go ahead and move us forward. Can you start creating your login? Yes, you can create your FSA ID right now if you want. Hopefully you wait until after this presentation, but you can create your FSA ID tonight. And I will have some information about that as well. So which year are you filling out FAFSA? I wanted to bring this up again. Seniors are the only people who are going to fill out FAFSAs right now. So a junior, sophomore, freshman, there's no reason for you to fill out FAFSA unless you are going to college next year. May graduates. So if you're going for your full senior year, just like normal, you're going to graduate in May. You are going to do the 2021, 2022 FAFSA. And just that. It only really gets complicated for the December graduates. If you're graduating early, which is not a huge number of students, but this year with COVID, it might actually even be more students than usual. But December graduates are going to fill out the 2021-2022 FAFSA. That's for next school year. But they are also going to fill out the 2020-2021 FAFSA as well. If you're graduating in December and going to college starting in January, you are actually going to be over 2 school years. This current school year, which will be January, that'll be second semester, and next school year as well. So that's a really important thing to remember. If you're a December graduate, you are going to do 2 FAFSAs, 2020, 2021, and 2021, 2022. If you do have questions about that, come see me, send me an email, talk to your counselor. We'll help you out. All right, I'm going to take a quick drink of water here before we get to some more information on FAFSA. So demographic questions. Is it a large part of the FAFSA process? As of last year, it was the very first part that you answer. Some general kind of questions and tips, basically. And some of this will apply to everything that you'll see. So this first tip applies to the entire FAFSA. Always pay attention if it's asking for student or parent information. Who is it asking for? Is it asking student name? Is it asking parent income? You don't want to put parent income for student income. The way the FAFSA works is all the student assets are valued more than the parent assets. So if you put the parents, let's say parents have $20,000 in savings and you say that the student has $20,000 in savings when the student has $0 in savings, that's going to be seen as the student has $20,000 to spend for college, which is not a good thing in this case. The parent part is valued less. So make sure parent assets are parent assets and listed so on FAFSA. The good thing is if you mess anything up, if you need to make a correction, if you want to change something, you can do that. There's nothing that stops you from going back into FAFSA and correcting something. 529s are the interesting one. All right, so I see that question come up. This comes up every year. A 529 plan is a certain type of college savings plan, and it is a tricky one. You want to make sure you're looking at who actually owns the 529 plan. That is the key part. It's who owns the 529 plan. So that's important as well, because sometimes grandparents might be the ones who got the 529 plan, and the 529 plan is in the grandparent's name, but it's going to be the beneficiary of the student. Don't need to really worry about that. If the parents own the 529 plan, let the parents, or the grandparents in this case, let them keep it, because grandparents' information does not show up on FAFSA. So if that's the case for the 529 plan, don't touch it. If you take money out of the 529 plan and start using it, that will end up showing up on your taxes, your 1040. So usually with 529 plans, definitely recommend that you are going to just leave them alone. In this case, the question, the person's saying that the parent, are the ones who own it. That would then be considered a parent asset. So the 529 plan is considered a parent asset and does get listed on FAFSA. So you will list it on there. If the student were to own it, it would get listed under the student, but in this case, it would be the parent. So that's a good question. If you do have more questions about 529 plans, definitely reach out to me, send me an email. We can talk about that as well. So some more tips here. Write your social security number and your name exactly as they appear on the card. Your social security card, that is. You want to get it exactly right, because that's how the government knows you. That's how the IRS knows you. And you want them, the people who are going to look at your FAFSA, to see it exactly the way it is on the card, the way they know it. More. Say yes to work study. That's a general tip here. I really, really recommend that you say yes to work study. Work study is just the opportunity to have a job on campus. So if you think maybe, or even if you think I probably don't, I still say go ahead and say yes, because you don't actually have to do the job. So you don't actually have to do the work study. I'm going to go back to one quick question about 529 plans. I have 2 529s for each kid. Do I just list the one for the child that is applying? That is a question that I'm going to go ahead and say we're going to double check on that one. So I am sending you my email address, which is mweber@maine207.org. If anyone else is in the same situation where you have multiple 529 plans, I want to get a definite answer to make sure we have the right answer for that. So send me an email so that way I can get that answer directly for you. So say yes to work study, because you don't have to actually do it. You just have the opportunity to have a job on campus. The question about selective service. So selective service is essentially the draft. And it is a requirement for males once they turn 18 to do selective service, to register if they want to receive any of this financial aid. So unfortunately, you are required to say, or you are required to register for selective service in order to receive any financial aid from FAFSA, that is. If you have not registered for selective service, the first question is going to ask if you have, and you're going to say no, if you're a male, that is. Then you will most likely say yes to registering, because FAFSA will ask if you want them to register for you. So you'll go ahead and say yes in order to receive this financial aid information. If you are unable to do that, This is where I mentioned transgender students before. If you are unable to answer yes to this, you may qualify for the Illinois RISE Act. So talk to your counselor or talk to me, and we'll figure that out. Females are not going to have to worry about this. So that's a question. They don't necessarily have to worry about it. Don't you have to be 18 is the question. So that's a good question. So you actually are not going to have to, or you do have to be 18 to register for selective service, but this, by doing it through FAFSA, they will register for you. So a 17-year-old will say, no, I'm not registered, but yes, I would like FAFSA to register me. So they will register you once you turn 18. So you'll automatically be registered in that case. All right. So right now, this is talking about how you actually send the FAFSA to colleges. So a big part of FAFSA is, yes, it gets sent to the federal government, but really the most important part is it getting sent to schools. So you're going to search for schools. And I bring this up too, especially in case a parent is filling out the FAFSA without the student being there. Talk to your student beforehand and figure out, get a list from them of what colleges they're going to apply to. It could be that they've already applied to or that they're going to apply to. You do not have to apply to a single college before you fill out FAFSA. They are separate parts. FAFSA and applications are completely different from each other. It doesn't matter which order you do them in. But you want to go ahead and have the list of colleges because of the fact that you have to send them. You have to send the FAFSA somewhere. So you can add up to 10 colleges at a time. If a student is applying or wants to apply to more than 10, that's okay. After a student submits, you just go back in, you take some colleges out, you put some colleges in, and then you resubmit. Like I said, you can always make changes. I wouldn't say redo. You don't want to redo the FAFSA, but you can always make changes. You're not locked in once you submit. If you want to make changes, if you have to make changes because you made a mistake, that's okay. You can do so. One of those changes, the most common one really is the 10 colleges that you list. If you send the FAFSA to a college and then you remove that college from the FAFSA, it doesn't matter. It's okay to remove a college. When you could put all 10 colleges and remove all 10 of those and put 10 different colleges, and 20 colleges now have your FAFSA. It doesn't matter if you take it away. They do not lose your FAFSA information. They already had it sent to them. So you can add as many as you want. You just had to do it in batches of 10. Really simply, you just search. The most common things they always have are the state, the city, and the school name. If you just put Chicago in, you're going to get a ton of schools. So sometimes it is useful to put the school name in. You just select the college. In this case, we have DePaul as the example. So you'd go ahead and click that box. And then the most important part is that you actually click add. FAFSA does require you to actually hit the add button. So you do have to add that. If you don't have any colleges in mind, I usually recommend just put Oakton on there. Send it to Oakton because you gotta send it to somebody. So go ahead and send it there. Maybe you want to send it to UIC. That's always a popular choice. DePaul, Loyola are popular as well. Just send it somewhere. It's okay if you don't even end up applying to that college. That's fine. You just want to send it somewhere. This is an important one that I want to take a moment because even though it seems obvious, you do want to get this answer right. So DePaul University is our example. You then have the option to live on campus, live with parents, or live off campus. And these words have specific meanings for all the college options. On campus means living in university or college owned property. That could be dorms. That could be a university apartment as well. Most likely for a freshman, it's going to be a dorm. With parent means with parents. So you're going to live at home. You're going to commute to school. Off campus is the one that throws people off. If you're living off campus, that means you're living in your own apartment, for example, own house, something like that. Something where the student is responsible for the payments. And the reason why that's important to mention is because the assumption is from the colleges and the FAFSA, if you can afford to live off campus in your own apartment or something like that, That must mean you can afford to do so, which means you need less help from FAFSA. That is the logic they use. Off campus will always get you the lowest amount of help from FAFSA. On campus will always get you the most amount of help from FAFSA. Now, the most amount of help could still be no help, but it would just mean you were closer to getting some help in that case. But on campus will always get you the most, will show that you have the most need from FAFSA. And the reason why is because, as a lot of our students have done the research now, living on campus means an extra, usually $10,000. So there's extra money that you have to pay. Let's see. I'm going to answer a couple of questions here. What if you plan on living with your parents, but change your decision when college comes by? Now, that is the key part here of you can always change the information in your FAFSA. This is one of those parts you can change. So you'll just resubmit it and change from with parent to on campus. I usually suggest that if a student is debating living on campus or living at home, is to just go ahead and say you're going to live on campus first, because that's going to give you the most need. And that's going to show you, can I afford to live on campus? And if you can't, it doesn't work out, that's okay. You just go back in and you change it to with parent. You do want to get this accurate. So like you do probably want to go in and change it. But honestly, usually the college can change this part for you. So that's okay. You just want to make sure you do let the college know. Because if you say you're going to live on campus, but you actually live at home and you just think you're going to get more money, they're going to find out and they're going to ask for that money back. One more question here. Does FAFSA, so for the FAFSA here, this question is asking about the different college amounts, and asking if the FAFSA amount can change for different colleges. And that's a good question. The answer is yes. So let's say we have DePaul and we have UIC, just to be two popular colleges that Maine East students like to apply to. You're going to have a higher financial need at DePaul than you will at UIC. And that's because DePaul has a higher tuition. And that really is all it comes down to. Like I said before, the FAFSA, all it does is spits out an EFC number, estimated family contribution. If it says the estimated family contribution is $10,000, that doesn't mean you have to pay $10,000 necessarily, but it says that it thinks the family can afford to pay $10,000 for college somehow, some way. Doesn't mean you got to write a check today, but somehow, some way, $10,000. If UIC's tuition is about $15,000, they subtract the EFC number, which is $10,000, and they get $5,000. So the financial need at UIC would be $5,000. At DePaul, which tuition's about $40,000, they subtract the 10 from 40, and they get $30,000 is the financial need for the student. That student is more likely to get financial need help at DePaul than they are at UIC, because the financial need is just greater. It is possible to get money at one school but not get money at another school. That's why I always recommend cast a wide net. Apply to multiple schools, some more expensive, some cheaper, some closer, some further, do whatever. Because at the end of the day, you want to see who you can afford to go to. I hate to say it that way, but college a lot of times is a financial piece to the puzzle. You want to go to a school that you're happy to go to, but you also want to go to a school that you can afford to go to as well. So see what your options are, and you don't know until you try. How much money do colleges typically offer on top of FAFSA? That would be a good question to ask the admission counselors at the various schools that you're interested in, because it really is going to depend. But they do have information like that they can tell you. So ask the admission counselors at the individual schools. And someone's asking, if you're only going to apply to Oakton, there's no ability to live on campus, so what would you put? So that's a great part too. Yeah, you can't live on campus at Oakton. They don't have dorms. If you're going to live with your parents, you'll say that you're going to live with parents. If you're going to live in an apartment somewhere in Des Plaines, in Park Ridge, wherever, then you'll go ahead and say off campus if you're going to be in your own apartment. Otherwise, you'll do with parent if you're living with parents. Can FAFSA also cover international colleges? Unfortunately, no, it will need to be used in the United States. It can usually cover when you do study abroad. it can often cover that. Or if you were to do an exchange program, it could cover that. But it will have to be used in the United States. That's a great question. So we're going to continue on. These are just true and false. This is usually something we do oftentimes with students in person or with the families in person. It's a lot more fun when you guys can all answer the questions. I'm going to ask, do not put your answer in the chat. Keep your answer to yourself, because the chat, I have some good questions lined up I want to get to, so I don't want to get them buried. So do not put your answer in the chat. Just keep it to yourself in this part. So true or false that grants are money that you're required to pay back after college? And that's false. So we're using some terminology here. Grants are free money. The difference between a grant and a scholarship, scholarships are usually based off of something you've earned. Those like your merit, you got really great grades, so you got a good scholarship. Could be talent-based, could be merit-based, like you're a really good artist, you're a really good flute player, or a really good athlete. Grants purely going to be based off of your financial need, things like FAFSA. Another one here, you are considered an independent student if your parents refuse to help you pay for college. That's false. So a parent refusing to help pay for college does not make a student independent. I'm going to go over with you what actually does make a student independent later. Your parent will need to create an FSA ID that is different from yours to electronically sign the FAFSA. And that is true. I did see that question come up in the chat earlier. Someone was asking about that. Parents and students need separate FSA IDs. Same thing with students needing separate FSA IDs from each other. So student 1 or child 1, child 2 would need different FSA IDs. But the good thing is a parent, as long as they have one FSA ID, that's all they need. Even if they had that FSA ID when they applied to college, when they were paying for school and filling out FAFSA. Or if it was for your first child, you made an FSA ID, you do not need to make a different FSA ID for your second child. You can use the same one. If for some reason you wanted to make a second one, then you would want the other parent to create that one. Because remember, FSA IDs are attached to your social security number. So it has to be just that one. Once you have one FSA ID, that is it. You're not supposed to make a new one. All right, your ethnicity, your age, and your grades make you ineligible for financial aid, and that is false. The only thing FAFSA really cares about is your financial need. FAFSA money can cover tuition, room and board, books, or transportation expenses. That is true. As long as it's an educational expense, you can pay for it with FAFSA money. So if you have extra money, that could pay for your books potentially. So that is a good thing to know. That's another good reason why this is a good thing to fill out. All right, dependency questions. So I always say check with somebody before you answer yes to a dependency question. So dependency questions come up on FAFSA to figure out if a student needs to put parent information or if they do not need to put parent information. Students, you do not get to choose whether you put parent information or not. You essentially need to be an independent student in order to not actually do that. If you are going to say yes to any questions of the dependency questions, if you put yes, you are instantly an independent student. Even if you only say yes to one question, you become an independent student. And as I said, if you find yourself answering yes, I strongly recommend you double check with me or a counselor. We just want to make sure that you didn't mess something up. All right, so we do have this part here. I'm going to go over all the questions here. Well, I'm not going to go over all of them. I'm going to show you all of them. You can read them yourselves, but I will mention some of the common ones. So these are the dependency questions. If a student got married, so if one of our students is married right now, they answer yes, and they are now an independent student. They do not need parent information. Some more common ones here. So other common ones would be like a student who was legally emancipated. So if you get emancipation, you would not be, or you would not use parent information. Another one could be if both parents were deceased, but maybe you live with grandma and grandpa, aunt or uncle, something like that. And and they didn't legally adopt you in that case. So parents are deceased, you did not get legally adopted, you are an independent student. That is another one that does come up every year. So there's a few of these. Just let's check. Come talk to me, come talk to your counselor. We will help you figure out if you are an independent or dependent student. The vast majority of our students are dependent students. A quick point I want to make, it does not matter for your tax status. So if you, for some reason, are not claiming the child on your taxes, your 1040, you can still have them be a dependent on FAFSA. Those are two separate things. They don't matter for each other. Important question here is who's a parent on the FAFSA. So adoptive, biological, or step. Those are the only people who are going to be considered parents. Couple important things to note here. So divorce is a tricky thing on FAFSA, so I'm going to try and clear it up as best as I can. So let's just say I am a student and my two parents have gotten divorced. Neither parent has gotten remarried. They are both single. They are divorced. I live with, let's say, my mom 51% of the time, and she provides 51% of the support. That is the person who is my parent on FAFSA because they are providing 51% or more support for me. So they are my parent. I like to make the joke that there's 365 days in a year, so you should be living with one parent more than the other. The odds are you can figure it out. If you do need help, I'd be more than happy to help out figuring that part out. Unfortunately for students and parents, you don't get to just choose which parent has the lowest income. That's not how it's supposed to work on FAFSA. It's supposed to be who provides 51% or more support. And this can change year to year. So that's okay. It can change year to year. So let's use me as the example again. Let's say I am a student. My parents have gotten divorced. I live with my mom, and my mom has gotten remarried. So since my mom provides 51% of the support, and she has gotten remarried, I am now required to use my mom and my stepdad's information. That's an important distinction there because sometimes it comes up where the family says, but the step parent doesn't actually provide support. The FAFSA doesn't care about that. The FAFSA will use the step parent's information as well. If you do have questions about this, definitely let's talk about it because parents can be tricky sometimes. One of the advantages to creating an FSA ID is the ability to use the IRS data retrieval tool. This very simply is a option where you put in your information. You can see the information that it asks for on the screen. I do recommend put it exactly as it says on your taxes. And this comes up every once in a while too. Let's say your accountant or whoever did your taxes put your address in incorrectly. Does not matter. Use whatever is on the tax information. So you want it to go into the IRS database the way the IRS database has it labeled. Same thing with names. So even if you've gotten divorced, but your taxes still have your old married name, you want to use the old married name on there because you want it to match as well. It's okay if you can't use the IRS data retrieval tool. It doesn't necessarily matter. The only thing it does is it saves you a little bit of time because the IRS is going to put information in your FAFSA for you. It will not require you to put things in manually. Answering some investment questions. All right. So do not include something that is the house you live in. Life insurance, retirement plans through your work. So your 401k, your 403b, do not include those. If you own a small business and it has less than 100 employees, you do not include that either. You're going to include an investment if it's real estate that you rent out to somebody. So not the home you live in, you're renting this out to somebody else. Your 529 plans do get included, stocks and bonds, CDs, money market. If you have let's say you have your 401k that you do not include, but you decide to get a separate retirement account, that one will get included. The one that's not through work will get included. The other thing that FAFSA is going to ask is the reported total of your cash, your checking, and your savings, keywords here, at the day you fill out the FAFSA. I always say this does not necessarily need to be the exact dollar amount, but obviously if there's $987, you can just say $2,000. That's okay. But you can't say, well, I have $20,000 and I'm going to round down to 15. Be close in that case. They technically could do an audit to double check. They most likely will not, but just be careful and be close. It asks this for the student and also the parent. Students, if you do not have a checking savings account, that's okay. Then you have nothing in there. All right, other tips. It will have a help and hints box next to every single question. So the odds are if you have a question, the answer is in the helps and hints box. If you don't have it in there, just ask me, ask your counselor. We'll help you out. This is an important one that I've mentioned multiple times, but it's worth saying it again. FSA IDs, because they can be a little confusing. Each student will always have their own. You only need one parent FSA ID for an entire family. It is attached to a social security number. So if dad is the one who makes it, then it is dad's FSA ID, which means dad is going to be the person who signs the FAFSA. Also important in the cases of divorce, if dad had an FSA ID for child 1, but child 2 is listing mom's information because mom is providing 51% support or more, then mom is going to need her own FSA ID because she's the one whose information is on there. In this particular example, the dad's information is not going to be listed on FAFSA. So the mom would have to have an FSA ID. Also, I want to reiterate that you will need your own email address to do this. So if parents don't have an email address, there's going to be a need to create one. You can go to Gmail, Yahoo, something like that. Just make something. Make sure you write down what the email is and make sure you write down what the password is. Students do this all the time where they create the email and the FSA ID for a parent, and then they forget what the password is. So next year, they have no idea how to get in there anymore. They don't know how to log in, and that creates issues for them. Make sure you write this down. Students, make sure you write down what your FSA ID and your password is. You need to write these things down because you don't want to forget them. While I'm mentioning this, you will also, students, want to use your personal email address. Do not use your Maine East email address. Once you graduate from Maine East, you lose access to your Maine East email address, but you're going to do the FAFSA every single year in college. So you're going to still need to have access to it. Of course, I mentioned this before, but always check if it's asking for student or parent information. I'm going to leave this slide up here for a little bit. That is my email, mweber@maine207.org. And the 2 spots, you can always make an appointment with me, Mr. Weber, at calendly.com/MaineEastCCRC, or with Miss Massini, our resident financial aid expert, at calendly.com/Monica-Massini.